how to talk down a suicidal person. 9 months ago, I found myself in the position of having to do exactly that. It was January or February, I'm not quite sure when, but it was a Saturday morning early, about 8 o'clock, and the weather was not dissimilar to what's out there tonight. And I was dressed in my rain gear, and I had taken my dog, Flash, out to Old Head Beach for his early morning constitutional. And everything was going fine, but at the bottom of the beach, as we turned around, Flash, very aptly named, took off like a bat out of hell. And in my rain gear, it was very difficult to move fast, and I wasn't as fit then as I am now, so I kind of waddled up after him as fast as I could, and I got as far as the car park. And I could hear him barking up at the far end. And if any of you know the car park out in Old Head, there is a kind of a bank there on the right-hand side as you go in. And at the top of that bank, there's a barbed wire fence. And behind it is basically brush and undergrowth and all of the rest of it. So he was up in the far corner of that, and of course, given the weather, the bank was very, very muddy and very, very slippy. So I had to scramble up it, navigate to the barbed wire, and of course ripped the trousers to shreds, and then make my way through the brush and the undergrowth. And as I was doing so, I was just vaguely conscious of a white van parked up in the far corner of the car park. I didn't pay any attention to it at the time. Anyway, Flash had cornered the sheep, literally cornered him, but it made it easier for me to get him because he couldn't run around the sheep, he was just going around like that. And I managed to grab him because he was barking away, so he didn't even notice me. I grabbed him, went back to the barbed wire, had him under my oxter, but then wondered, how am I going to get him and me over the barbed wire, down the muddy bank, and get him onto the lead and keep him away from the sheep. And while I was contemplating this, he wriggled out from under my arm and took off after the sheep again. I hauled him back a second time. A second time he got away from me and went over to the sheep. And at this stage I was starting to despair. But I got him a third time anyway, and when I turned around I was confronted by a man standing in the field. And my first thought was, oh my God, it's the farmer and he's going to shoot us both. But it wasn't. It was White Van Man. And he said, can I help you? So I practically fell on him with gratitude. And between the two of us, we got the dog and myself and himself safely down to the bottom of the car park, got the dog back on the lead, and all was well. The poor traumatised sheep got up and ran away. I have no idea where it came from, but it was in one piece too. So he said something to me, White Van Man, about being very brave to get out in this weather, and I said, oh, are you not out for a walk yourself? And he said, no, I'm just killing time until I go to work. So that was fine anyway. I got Flash into the van and went off into Louisburg to get my usual Saturday morning treat of the Irish Times and a large latte. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something not quite right about the situation that I had left behind me. And no matter how often I tried to dismiss it, I just said no. It kept occurring to me that if you're killing time at a beach, regardless of what the weather is like, you're going to want to see the beach. You're not going to tuck yourself off up into the furthest corner where the only view you have is what effectively amounts to a mud wall. So instead of going home, I decided to go back. I parked the car, got out and walked over to his van, and as he saw me coming, he opened the door. And I said to him, are you all right? And he said, which I thought rather odd, he said, why do you ask? So this was putting it up to me. I had a certain idea in my head. What was I going to say? How do you confront something like this? So I took a deep breath and I said, it has occurred to me that you might be thinking of committing suicide. So he started to cry and we got talking. And it transpired that he was being treated for severe depression by a very good medical team in Castlebar. We talked about his life. He was married with 2 young children, had a good life, had a good job. By his own admission, there was nothing wrong with any of it. But to him, all he could see was blackness. He saw nothing of any value in his future. And he was indeed contemplating suicide at that moment. Now, he did have an emergency number to contact in cases like that. And he had decided that he wasn't going to call them. So we continued to talk. And by the end of it, I had extracted a promise from him that he wouldn't actually do anything until he had called that number. And I left him confident in the belief that, at least for that day, he wasn't going to kill himself. Now, we don't expect to find ourselves in situations like that. But I would wager that virtually everybody in this room knows somebody who is depressed or who has considered suicide. And I think it's something that probably scares all of us, the idea of having to confront it. And we're always inclined to think, what will I say? What if I say the wrong thing? What if he or she doesn't listen? The words you say to somebody who is contemplating suicide will not cause them to kill themselves. They're already contemplating that. But the words you say may well stop them from doing it. And I learned that from a course I did when I was working in IT Sligo back in 2008 from an organisation called Heads Up. I suggest you look them up. It's headsup.ie. And they run courses in the workplace that equip people with the skills to recognise the signs of suicide and also the skills to deal with it, to confront it, to talk to them, and to be able to guide that person to where they need to go. That's all. It's not about giving them the professional support that they need. That's elsewhere. The course is run over 2 days. There's a lot of role play. It was very, very tough. We talk about what we think suicide is, how we feel about suicide. We share all of those views. Everybody thought something different about it. We talked about how we might cope with somebody who had mental health issues. I would urge anybody who's in a workplace to consider getting those people in. If you're an employer, get them in. If you're an employee, suggest it to your boss. If only for purely pragmatic reasons, because we lose so many man-hours, so many working days to mental health illness throughout the year, you would save yourself a lot of money by running those courses. But more importantly, if you are equipped with those skills, you may well turn out to be the right person in the right place at the right time. Thank you.
Well done.